President Putin, President Obama, Russia, Iran, Syria. After both presidents delivered speeches to the UN General Assembly this past Monday, lots of people are talking about their showdown. But what really happened? And what does it mean to us in Canada? Joining me now, my favorite foreign affairs critic, because he's not just a critic, he's a critical thinker from a different perspective that you don't get to hear very often in the media. Writer, lawyer, advocate, Philippe Assouline. Welcome back, sir.
Hi, Dahlia. Thank you for having me again.
Well, I think that you are a great person to share your perspective on this, because we're hearing, I'm seeing conflicting things when I'm even reading about how people looked at this. I guess you can say, some people would say a confrontation between the presidents. Some people say remarkably similar views. Some people say conflicting. How do you see this?
It's both. It's a very good question. So they both paid lip service in their UN addresses to internationalism, to a kind of moral internationalism, to a deference to international law and cooperating, and big countries not dictating anything to little countries, and it all sounded nice and very Woodrow Wilson. However, behind this rhetoric, there's the behavior of both countries, which is very different. And there's also little sniping, actually not little in diplomatic talk. There were very aggressive sniping attacks from each. So Barack Obama basically called out Putin on Russia's behavior, and he listed a number of things that came, negative consequences that came from Putin's behavior, basically schooling him. He said, hey, if you hadn't done this, you wouldn't have the sanctions, you wouldn't have the people leaving your country, you wouldn't have the ruble suffering. And Putin basically accused the West of creating ISIS. He accused America, essentially, of creating ISIS.
It's funny because you talk about Obama schooling him. Some people say that Putin schooled Obama on democratic values, and they found that ironic that Putin would be schooling Obama. A Russian is schooling an American on democracy.
Yeah, in terms of speech, they were both condescending to each other. Barack Obama had a kind of a professorial tone to his speech where he was like talking down and teaching the assembled countries what they should be doing. And Putin did the same. He opened with, a few paragraphs about how democracy should work and respecting the rule of law, etc. But in the background, on the one hand, Obama talks about multilateralism and internationalism, but in practice, America is basically ceding the ground to Russia in the Middle East, which is a reversal of 7 years of policy. And in practice, Putin is talking about democracy and international law, but what he's actually doing is charging in roughshod into these countries, invading Ukraine, invading Syria now, using jet fighters to bomb. I don't remember him getting permission from anybody to do that. So a lot of talk, a lot of lip service, a lot of little sniping, very, very different behavior on the ground.
My favorite foreign affairs critic is with us right now, Philippe Assouline, and we're talking about, if you may have seen it at the UN General Assembly, there's a video going around online. People actually care about politics when you see a video going viral. And this is Obama and Putin giving their, I guess you can say, conflicting yet similar speeches to the UN General Assembly. Now, when you look at President Putin, the U.S. and media often portray him as a total brute. How do you see him, and how did you see him portraying himself in this conversation?
Well, he's definitely not a brute. He's unapologetic about pursuing Russia's interests, and he's been a lot less diplomatic recently in how he speaks. Russia has very important interests in Syria, and that is a second avenue for gas delivery to Europe, which is there. There's a whole basin of gas that's been discovered in the Mediterranean, and he's got a naval base to project Russian power and influence in the region. I don't think it's brutish to present that as some kind of defense of democracy. It's pretty slick. He does it quite well. He's practicing the art of saying one thing and doing another. And he's convinced the world that he's actually fighting ISIS, when in fact it seems now from recent reports that he's bombing local Syrian rebels. So brute, I wouldn't say so. Unapologetic and aggressive in defending his interests, yeah, I would say ruthless, but he's very slick about it.
What about Obama? Because he made this overture to, his sometime adversary, saying the U.S. would work with any nation to try to bring an end to fighting in Syria. This has dragged on for 4.5 years, and he says this now. How much do you believe of what Obama has said, and should he have been saying this years ago?
again, there's this dichotomy between what he says and what he does. Internationalism, all the countries cooperating to facilitate peace or some kind of resolution in Syria and other places, that depends necessarily on the U.S., the biggest power by far in the world. But what he's doing in practice is it's kind of lethargic internationalism where he says we all have to cooperate, we all have to do things. But he's like shifting the burden onto other countries. In practice, the U.S. is withdrawing from Syria. In practice, he did not respond to the barrel bombs and the chemical weapons. And in practice, what happens when you have that vacuum is that Russia is stepping in, which is a big reversal for the Americans to essentially approve of Russia stepping into the Middle East. Russia's done it in the past in the form of the Soviet Union, but the Americans certainly did not approve back then. Now it seems like they've approved or will not oppose it. So it's very nice and good to talk about internationalism and democracy, but if the United States doesn't play an active role, other countries will. And those countries do not share Obama's commitment to international law or multilateralism.
We're having the conversation about President Putin, President Obama, Russia, Iran, Syria after both presidents delivered speeches to the UN General Assembly on Monday. And I'm joined by writer, lawyer, advocate Phil Assouline, and we're talking about the things that have come out of this that affect us that we don't even realize. Looking at the speeches and looking at what you think, well, because speeches are one thing, words are one thing, actions are the other. What do you think is the most interesting thing that you can take from this, Phil?
So you asked me before the break what this means for Canadians and what this means for us here in the West. Mm-hmm. So as you're saying, the speeches are one thing, the actions are another. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes. This deal with Iran was signed, and suddenly Russia barges into Syria and starts bombing things. But it seems we're coming to a head between the West, that means the U.S. and the EU, and Russia. Russia apparently now is bombing U.S. and European-backed rebels there, okay? There is not going to be a solution in any easy way. The Sunnis are not going to accept Assad staying, and the Russians and the Iranians are not going to accept him leaving and being replaced by a Sunni, okay, most likely. There may, by miracle, be somebody who can unite everybody, but it's extremely unlikely. That means for any transition to happen, you're going to have a big, brutal war now. You're going to have one side being crushed or the other. What does that mean for us? That means more Syrian refugees, tragically. There's going to be a lot more suffering if Assad now is empowered to crush his people. The Sunni extremists are also seeing this as the West empowering the Shiites. So it's going to create more hostility to the West. There may be more terrorism. In fact, ISIS's ideal scenario is for all the countries in the world to start fighting it in Syria. This is how it sees the end of days. It's basing itself on some kind of Sunni eschatology, on the end of days narratives and Sunni tradition. Its own magazine is the name of the city where this battle's supposed to happen. This is going to drive recruitment. Canada will probably stay involved in the coalition, at least if there's no big shift in government or policy. So there will be a fallout for us here.
I like how I ask you a question and you go back to the question I asked before the break. You hold media to account even. I love it.
I think it's a great question. I think it was important to ask.
I was definitely going to get to it, but I guess my head is floating with so many things as you're talking. It brings up so many different points to me. When we look at the speeches, what do you think the greatest misconception is from it? Do you think that it fooled people?
Yes, I think it fools people. I think a huge force in international politics is that we are fooled by what we want to hear. Politicians are experts at manipulating our emotions. We talked about this last time. There's a tragic, heartbreaking picture of a boy dead on a Turkish shore, a Syrian refugee, and all of a sudden, the focus of the planet for a week is on what Europe can do instead of solving the problem in Syria. So now there's all this talk about ISIS and bombing ISIS and fighting terrorism from Assad, from Obama. Okay, really what's going on here, on the Russian side at least, is the Russians are trying to play chess regarding gas to Europe, regarding a naval base. They don't really care about terrorism, or they wouldn't be backing Hezbollah and Assad, who's done a lot more damage than ISIS. So people are fooled and manipulated by it. And that's why I was saying that Putin is not a brute. He knows what he's doing. He's placating his own people, first of all, and then he's having an effect on the West.
Okay, I'm going to give you two questions here. One question for President